Now, we spent some time with Jeremiah, who was a prophet in Jerusalem when the Babylonians are coming and are about to destroy the city. First thing the Babylonians did is they took the leadership of Jerusalem away from the city to live in exile in Babylon. Ezekiel, the prophet, was one of those who was led away to go live in Babylon. So Jeremiah is speaking God's word in Jerusalem. Ezekiel is speaking God's word among the exiles in Babylon. It's really interesting. Ezekiel, to be taken away like this, he must have been a fairly wealthy person, because the Babylonians at first only took away the upper crust, the leadership of society. So he must have been fairly well-to-do. We also know that his wife died during the siege of Jerusalem. So these were sad times for Ezekiel. He's fascinating in so many ways. You know, we have that old spiritual, Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air. Ezekiel had these visions of, a wheel and these amazing things that he saw in heaven. He was a real visionary, not in the sense of he had a social critique of society. He really had an extraordinary experience of God that was too big for words. He tried to describe it. He saw a wheel in the air. It was spinning, the wheel inside the wheel. Visions of heaven often are like this. If you think about the book of Revelation, the book of Daniel and such, Ezekiel has this great experience. The amazing thing about Ezekiel having this experience of God in Babylon is that most of the Israelites believed that God had given up on them, that God could only be known through that Jerusalem temple. And the real revolution of the prophet Ezekiel and others who came after him is that God was not confined to just that Holy Land. God was not just confined to that temple. Even though the temple had been destroyed and the Israelites had been defeated, their God, Yahweh, was still alive, still active. The glory of the Lord even appears in Babylon. That had to be hopeful, almost unbelievable, I would imagine, for those exiles who were, of course, at the point of giving up. Ezekiel really believes that God used the Babylonians to destroy Jerusalem and that it was God's judgment. That doesn't mean that the Babylonians were holy people, but it's the kind of thing that happens in the world when God is wired in a certain way, that when we rebel against God and we don't serve God, they're bad things that happen, even to a nation, not just to individuals. Ezekiel must have just been fascinating to people that saw him, and I say saw him instead of just heard him. If we read Ezekiel, we find that he didn't just talk, he did some amazing things. In chapters 4 and 5 and 6 and 9 and 12, God tells Ezekiel to do some very strange things indeed. One is he tells him to draw a city of Jerusalem on a tablet and then lie down next to the tablet for hundreds of days and just look at it. And that was a symbol to the people of them being sent off into exile. He told Ezekiel one time to pack his bags and to carry his bags around the city every day, because the people were going to be shipped off into exile. They were going to be nomads. They weren't going to be at home any longer. He told Ezekiel one time to cut his beard. He must have had a long beard. He said, okay, cut your beard, and not at home by yourself, but out in public. He'd go out in public, and he would cut his beard, and everyone would think, there's crazy Ezekiel cutting his beard. God said, take a third of the beard and cast it to the wind, and take a third of the beard and burn it. And take another third of your beard and cut it with a knife. And this is a symbol of the people of God's judgment, of what's going to happen to them. They must have thought that he was, just absolutely crazy. At times, he's catatonic for a long period of time. He can't speak for a long period of time. So it's not just his words, it's also his actions that dramatized what God was doing. Now, Ezekiel also, like Jeremiah, he's part of that, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. When Jerusalem finally is destroyed and the people then are utterly forlorn and they think that there is no hope, Ezekiel takes on a very, very positive, hopeful tone indeed. Probably his most famous passage is chapter 37, where he sees a vision again. And it's kind of a crazy vision, but we love it. He sees a vision, and it's a valley full of dead bones. And Ezekiel says, oh, they're dead bones. And God says, can those bones live? And Ezekiel says, well, oh, Lord, only you know. And of course, the wind begins to come, the bones come together, and the flesh begins to form on them. It's one of the early instances in the Bible of some sense of life after death, of some sense of resurrection. But I would point out in Ezekiel 37, God isn't promising the resurrection of the individual. Oh, I die and then I get to go be in heaven one day. What he's envisioning there is the resurrection of the people It's the people of Israel who have lost everything, who've died, but that God will raise up the people. It's the nation that God intends to keep alive. It's a lovely passage, 37. Then at the very end of Ezekiel, there's a fascinating section beginning in chapter 40, where the temple has been destroyed, God's holy place. And Ezekiel has a vision from God of what the new temple will look like. And it's a splendid place, a little bit different from the earlier one, grander in many ways, purer in many ways. So we're already beginning to develop the hope that we'll go back home one day and our life really will be centered on the worship of God. It won't just be faked. It won't have injustice polluting it. We will really have hearts for God. Very, very hopeful book despite all the words of judgment that come earlier. So, Ezekiel, hope we enjoy reading together.